Hearing no objections, it is so decided.
After 2 weeks of intense negotiation at the Global Climate Summit, world leaders have agreed a deal. But is it a cop-out? The revised agreement means countries must strengthen their emissions-cutting targets for 2030. But a last-minute intervention from India waters down the commitment to phase out coal, leaving many nations deeply disappointed. A visibly emotional COP26 President Alok Sharma apologised for the way in which the talks ended and the disappointment caused. UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres calls the final agreement in Glasgow an important step, but questions if it's enough to avoid what he calls climate catastrophe. The UN Climate Summit in Glasgow has adopted a new pact. It's aimed at curbing global warming, but many have called the deal a disappointment. The summit's British president has apologised for the way that the process unfolded, but said the agreement would keep within reach the goal of limiting temperature rises to 1.5 degrees. But many countries said the final text had been watered down, and in fact, the UN Secretary-General said the world was still knocking on the door of a climate catastrophe. Well, at the heart of the 2 weeks of talks was the aim of keeping temperatures as close to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels as possible to try to avoid the worst effects of climate change. So what sort of impact will the agreement have on global temperatures and the way we all live? Here's our science correspondent, Rebecca Morrell.
Piece by piece, after 2 weeks of intense negotiations, uniting people from all over the world, a plan for the future of our planet has come together. But will it stop temperatures rising over 1.5 degrees? At the start of the conference, every country submitted plans to cut their greenhouse gas emissions, and scientists have been crunching the numbers. Global temperatures are already 1.1 degrees over pre-industrial levels. If every nation carries out its long-term pledges, we get to 1.8 degrees. But if you look at what countries are actually doing, a more likely outcome is 2.4 degrees.
This is more progress on climate than we've seen before. But in an absolute sense, we are miles and miles away from where we need to be, and we're still on course for really catastrophic warming.
The Glasgow conference clearly hasn't solved the problem, but will some aspects of what's happened here keep 1.5 alive? Coal, the most polluting fossil fuel, will be reduced but not phased out. Some nations will cut methane, a potent greenhouse gas. Tackling deforestation has been promised too. And importantly, countries are being asked to return next year with better plans to cut emissions.
We need these governments to really come back with enhanced action, not just empty pledges, not just about net zero by 2050, but the actions that they're going to take in the short term.
So how will the Glasgow Agreement affect all of us? How are our lives going to change? Ultimately, this will impact everything, from how we get around to the food we eat and how we heat our homes. But this will take time. Our fragile planet is already changing, and while there has been progress in Glasgow and 1.5 degrees hasn't been lost, it will take a monumental effort to stop temperatures from rising above that. Rebecca Morrell, BBC News, Glasgow.